Good evening all, and welcome. Being followed home is an incredibly unsettling experience, but it can be far worse than that, as we're about to find out. Also, please welcome Papa Scare, who will be joining us in tonight's stories. But with that being said, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. This story happened a few years back, when I was visiting an old friend in Cologne, while at the same time taking advantage of him as a free stay for a meeting with my LARPing group. For those of you who don't know what LARP is, it's basically real-life role-playing. Imagine a Dungeons & Dragons game, but instead of people sitting around a table with a dice, you have people actually dressed up as their characters role-playing in real life. It was my hobby since I was 14, and after I got a job that paid pretty well, I began to get into it a bit more. One of the things I did spend a solid amount of money on was my character's armor. An important note for this story is that I wear chainmail under my outer armor. After the meeting of the group, I got mostly out of my LARP outfit because I didn't really want to walk through Cologne, which is one of the more dangerous places in the city, as a medieval knight. But since I couldn't fit it all in my bag, I kept on my chainmail, as well as my tunic and pants. On my bus ride home, I noticed some guys seemed to have an eye on me, but I guessed it was because I still looked out of place. When he got off at the same station as me, I didn't really pay him much attention. I was almost at my friend's place when I decided to call him, asking if he should meet me to get a doner kebab, which he agreed before I even ended my question. I arrived to our meeting point, spot first, and waited. Then I noticed the guy from the bus again, who is now walking straight towards me. I got closer to the wall to make space, but he didn't pass me. He stopped before me and pulled a knife on me, demanding my bag, wallet, and phone. I was willing to give him my wallet, but tried to explain that the bag only had some armor and foam weapons. But it seemed that even talking was enough to set this guy off, and suddenly, I felt 2 fast, stinging punches in my stomach. It hurt like hell, and I dropped down and the guy grabbed my bag. Honestly, the next few moments are lost to me. I was barely able to notice anything other than the voice in my head screaming, "You got stabbed!" Then, I realized my friend was shaking me. My bag was open and my stuff was all over the place, and he was holding my helmet with blood on it. As he said, he saw the guy throwing it to the ground, after the bag was most likely too heavy and big for him. So my friend, seeing me on the floor, managed to grab the first thing he could, which was the helmet, and bashed the guy with it until he ran away. We later checked my stomach, and even though I had 2 giant, deep blue bruises which hurt like hell, I only had small cuts, since the chainmail stopped the knife. Until this day, I get sick in the stomach when I think on that day. And remember that if I had not worn a piece of my LARP clothing that day, I would be dead. Literally killed over a bag full of costumes with 150 euros in my wallet and a 10-year-old phone. The world is messed up.
This story happened a few years ago. I was in my early 20s and was studying in Paris, France. I was going home from uni. I usually took a short bus ride and walked the rest of the way. That day, I felt slightly uncomfortable. I could sense some guy looking intensely at me. I was used to unpleasant, unsolicited gazes, but this time, his gaze felt beastly. It's hard to explain why, but I felt like a prey being stalked. I decided to get off the bus a few stops early. I wanted to avoid him and didn't want him to see where I usually got off. Like I learned in the movies, I waited until someone else pressed the stop button, and waited until the last moment to stand up and leave. I didn't notice him getting off the bus. Just as I was feeling the relief of having escaped an uncomfortable situation, I looked over my shoulder, and there he was, a few meters behind. I had the distressing feeling his eye had just looked away the moment I turned. I walked into a shop, took my phone, and pretended to be on a call. When I couldn't see him anymore, I exited and made my way home as fast as I could. I kept looking back in the busy street. I zigzagged, crossed the street at every crossing. Finally, I believed that him getting off at the same stop as me was just a coincidence. When I reached my building, I looked back one last time, and there he was. His alarming gaze on me, smirking. I ran up to my apartment, climbing the stairs 4 at a time. I reached the top floor, squeezed through the door, locked it, and froze. My intercom was ringing. Don't ask me why I picked it up. I regretted it the moment I did. I could hear the opposite flat intercom ringing as well. He had pressed all the buttons one by one, hoping someone would open. But now, he knew my name.
Gabrielle?
Oh shoot, I felt like a deer in the headlights, frozen.
Open the door, please.
Said a pleading voice.
I just want to talk to you.
Somehow, I couldn't move or speak.
Come to the window,
he added.
Look at me. You'll see I'm not a bad guy.
Something clicked. He wanted to locate my apartment in the building. I was not going to make that mistake. I hung up in shock. I waited by the door without moving for what seemed hours. When I finally managed to calm myself, I called my long-distance boyfriend. Call the police, he said immediately. Why didn't I call the police? I don't know. Today, it would be the first thing I would do. The fear of making a big deal out of something not important, perhaps. What an idiot I was. I called my best friend instead. I didn't want to feel alone. I told her all about it, and after a while, I felt better, safe. We started laughing. Suddenly, the intercom rang again. 2 hours had passed since I'd come home. I answered.
Gabrielle,
said the voice.
Open, please.
I still remember the chills I felt. He was still there. He was still there all this time. I was silent, petrified. He was silent, but I could sense his trepidation.
Gabrielle, let me in. I'm so thirsty,
he said.
Just give me a glass of water.
This broke the tension. I hung up. Curled up in a corner, literally in recovery position, terrified, I waited. I was scared to make a sound. I knew he couldn't hear me from the hall, but I was scared to even breathe. The intercom rang again, and again. I didn't answer this time. I crouched to the sofa and fell asleep in exhaustion. I heard the intercom ring one more time in the middle of the night. I woke up in the morning, afraid to leave my apartment. I called my dad, who came to pick me up. There was no one in the hall, but there was a note on my mailbox.
Gabrielle, I'm a nice guy. You should have opened to me.
We immediately went to the nearest police station. The police listened and, of course, told me that I should not hesitate to call them. My dad called a locksmith to install digicode on the building door the same day and wrote a message to each of my neighbors asking to not open the door to anyone they didn't expect. He sat in the cafe in front of my building with 2 friends every evening for more than a week. I never saw the stalker again. After this episode, I used a different route to and from uni every day. I kept my phone tightly in my hand and looked back every few meters. Today, I am still very observing of my surroundings. I never answer the door if I'm not expecting someone. So, people, if you ever find yourself in any kind of uncomfortable situation, call the police. Don't be an idiot like me. Be safe, everyone.
I'm going to give you a description of myself at the time of the incident, which was around 4 years ago now. 5'5", 26, woman, medium length, bleach blonde hair, curvy, 175 pounds, wearing black high-waisted tights and a pink crop top. Now to the story. 3 years ago, I was walking home late at night from my friend's house. It was dark, and at the time I lived in a rough part of a large city. I've had many sketchy situations that I've gotten myself out of, so I guess I felt sort of invincible, like nothing truly scary could happen to me. When I walk alone, I always stay very alert and aware of my surroundings for my own safety in case. About halfway home and roughly 10 minutes to my apartment, I notice a van started tailing me. I was used to this, since in my city it's very common for a young woman in a rough area to be propositioned for sex. It's embarrassing how desensitizing this is to me. I did my usual and crossed the road so that I would be walking beside the traffic heading in the other direction. I wasn't scared, I was just annoyed. A van then turned down a side street and back onto the road that I was on and pulled up to me. At this point I wasn't scared. It happened many times, and it never mattered if I was wearing something that showed more or less skin, or if I was wearing a winter zipped-up coat just below the chin all the way down to my ankles. This area is notorious for this type of activity. I decided to be firm and told the person sternly that I wasn't interested. I noticed there were 2 men in the van. They almost looked identical, may have been brothers. They had dark eyes and short dark hair. The van didn't move. I was super annoyed and crossed the road again to get away. At this point, I figured this would be enough for them to stop following me, but they didn't. They kept circling back every time I crossed the road. I've never had to put that much effort into getting a horny pervert to leave me alone, and that is when I began to feel unsafe. They zipped by me at the speed the traffic was flowing in, and I yelled for them to leave me be. I thought it finally worked. It had been 3 minutes and I hadn't seen the van, so I thought I was in the clear. Just in case, I pulled my phone out and was getting ready to call my sister who I lived with. Then the van pulled up to me very quickly, and before I could even blink, one of the men jumped out the van, opened the back door and approached me quickly in an aggressive manner, as if he was trying to scoop me up and throw me into the vehicle. The traffic in the area is very inconsistent. It was dead, and I imagined that's what they were waiting for. Just as a man was about to place his hands on me, I tilted my phone and said, "You're being filmed in my live video chat. I gave my friends your license plate number and the police have been notified." I was so scared, but I didn't let that show. I stayed as calm as I could. The man paused like he was considering if I was bluffing or telling the truth, so I tilted the phone to give the fake audience a better look at him. He then jumped back into the van and they sped off. I've never been the same since that night. I'm afraid of walking alone even in the day now. Stay safe out there. To the creepy guys in the van, I hope karma catches up with you soon.
I'm going to start this story off by saying that at the time this happened, I was a 19-year-old sophomore in college. I was living on campus in their apartment-style dorms, and my college wasn't exactly in the nicest part of the city. So I'd usually drive a little bit further to go grocery shopping so I could be in a little bit more of a safer area. The night this happened, I was going to cook dinner and realized I didn't have some of the spices I needed. Normally I would have just said forget it and made something else, but the meat had already been thawed for a day or so and I needed to cook it. I debated just going to the Walmart that was 2 minutes away from my campus, but it was getting late and I didn't want to go there by myself in the dark. That Walmart is right next to a major highway, and being a girl by herself, I felt uncomfortable risking it. So instead, I went to the Walmart that was about 20 minutes away, a few towns over. I got to that other Walmart and bought my spices along with a few other things and checked out. No problem. By the time I was done, it was now completely dark out. I was back at the driver's side of my car and putting my few bags in the passenger seat when I noticed a woman. She was African American, maybe in her 50s, looking at the back of my car. At the time, I drove a really old car, and if you know your cars, it would be surprising that it was still running. I've had a few people in the past look at it, older men usually, or come up and ask me about my car. I figured that this is what that lady was doing, and I kind of ignored it until, out of the corner of my eye, I saw her come around my car and stop about 2 feet behind where I was standing. I was parked next to a parking lot median, so it's not like she was getting in a car next to me. "Excuse me," she said. I turned around saying, "Yes?" kind of prepared to answer what year or model is your car. "My church is giving out leftover boxes of food from our food drive to people in need. Could I give you one? We have them in our car over there." This immediately set off an alarm in my head. I mean, she had just seen me put my groceries in my car. Why would I need something else if I went shopping? Also, the churches and food pantries around my college were usually cleaned out after they had their shopping days for the people who really relied on things like food drives. There was hardly, if ever, anything that was just left over. I'd watched enough Criminal Minds and read enough Facebook posts to know that this felt like a human trafficking lure. I stuttered over my words a bit at first, trying to figure out what to say, but finally got out, "Oh no, thank you, I'm good. I'd like to see it go to someone who could really use it." I felt like that was an okay response if she really was handing out boxes. "Are you sure? They're just right over here in my car," she said, taking a step and making the gap between us a little smaller. I was panicking. As she stepped closer, I tried to nonchalantly put my hand in my bag and look for the small pocket knife my dad had given me. My mind was racing as I tried to find the knife, but also tried to keep my face looking calm and not suspicious. I repeated to her that I was good and the box of food should go to someone who could really use it. She finally seemed to let up, saying, "Okay, have a good night. God bless you," and all that. I told her to have a good night as well. Then, as soon as her back was turned, I got into my car and locked all the doors. As I pulled out of my parking spot, I noticed that the car she was walking to had 3 large men standing at the trunk of the car. They were barely illuminated by the parking lot lights, but I think it was an early 2000s white Nissan. As I tried to go down the parking lot aisle as fast as I could, I saw the men looking at the back of my car, just like the woman had. I then noticed where their eyes were shifted to. They weren't looking at my car. They were looking at my license plate. Just as I got to the end of the aisle, waiting to turn, I saw 2 of the men get into the front seats and the other man and the woman get in the back seat. Their car started and they started to pull out too. I was having a full-blown panic attack now. Just a week before, my friend had posted something on Facebook about how 2 men followed her and her mum through a Walmart. Again, I had watched enough crime shows to know that this wasn't painting a pretty picture. I finally got my opportunity to turn, but that car was coming up behind me. I made the quick decision to take a really odd way back to campus, made a ton of turns, and went through a lot of small streets instead of taking one of the 2 main roads. I don't think I saw the car again after I pulled out of the parking lot, but I was definitely not risking it. By the time I got back to my college, I had calmed down a little. I started to wonder, maybe you're overthinking this. Believe there are actually good people in the world. And I decided that if they were really giving out boxes of food, then hopefully it does go to someone in need. That was until I was walking behind my car, heading towards my building. There was an SF, faintly written in white sidewalk chalk on the brown paint of my car. I was shocked and terrified, knowing that I definitely did not put that there. I said out loud, "Oh my God," as I practically dropped my bags on the ground and rushed to wipe the chalk off with the sleeve of my jacket. My car had been tagged. After a few seconds of wiping, the chalk was gone, so I locked my car, grabbed my bags, and raced into my building. I got into my dorm and saw the dinner I was supposed to make, but I had lost my appetite completely. I put everything away and went into my bedroom, still reeling over what had happened in the last 45 minutes. I sent the whole story as a Snapchat video to some of my friends, who were just as shocked as I was. My one friend, Sarah, said that she thinks SF stood for single female. It made sense, which made the whole experience that much scarier. I called my mum afterward and told her everything that happened. And by the end of the call, she was sending me an Amazon package with pepper spray in it. I didn't go out after dark or by myself for about 2 weeks after that happened. I'd have a friend from campus or work go with me, or I just wouldn't go. The whole situation was terrifying, but I think the strangest part about all of this was that I was supposed to have been in the safer area. I drove all the way to that Walmart because I had a bad feeling about the one that was closest to me. I started going to the Walmart that was closer to me after that, and I've never had a negative experience at the closer one since I started going. It's hard to believe that all the stuff I've seen on TV and the internet could have almost happened to me. So, to the people in that Walmart parking lot in November 2020, let's not meet ever again.
This happened back in 2013, when I was living in New York City as a 23-year-old. I was living with my best friend from college on the west side near Times Square and K-Town. I was going through some tough times back then, as I was unemployed and I had a lot of time, so I would go on walks by myself to clear my head. Well, one night I was feeling especially depressed, so I decided to walk to K-Town to grab myself a drink. I'm Korean, by the way. I walked into a Korean bar, got some weird looks from the waiters as I asked for a table by myself. After ordering a few Josu bottles, I was feeling pretty drunk, so I decided to walk back home. However, as I was exiting out of the bar, this Korean guy followed me. He looked ordinary, just like a nice Korean guy. He told me that he saw me drinking at the bar by myself and that he would love to walk me home to make sure I got home safely. I politely declined. After all, my apartment was very nearby, but he insisted and looked so harmless that I decided to take him up on his offer. We walked about 10 minutes. It was quite pleasant. We were both a little drunk, but I remember talking about all sorts of stuff, nothing personal. When we finally arrived to my apartment, I thanked him and wished him farewell. Now, my apartment was a 5-story walk up, and there was a main door where we needed a key to open to get into the building. I didn't think much of it, and inserted the key to open the door and went in. The door takes a little while to close completely, and it was my mistake for not checking before I started to ascend the stairs. While I was approaching the second floor, I heard someone grab the door from closing, and I heard footsteps coming up the stairs. Goosebumps shot all over my body, and I felt like I was in danger, so I began picking up the pace and heard the footsteps going faster up the stairs. I lived on the 5th floor, so I started running, keys in hand. The guy started to run the stairs as well, and I could hear him getting closer and closer to me. I finally got to my floor, and as I tried to open the door, I looked back and saw the guy's head on the staircase. I rushed to open the door and managed to close it in his face. My heart was beating so fast I didn't know what to do at that point. It was already 3 a.m. and my roommate was asleep. Luckily, he didn't knock or anything, so I decided to just go to my room and hope that he was gone. At around 7 a.m., my roommate woke me up. She said there was a man standing in front of our apartment door. My heart sank as I explained the situation to her. She and I went to the door and screamed that we were going to call the police if he didn't leave. I looked at the peephole, and he told me he would only go home if I gave him my number. I then called the police and saw him being escorted out. My roommate had to go to work, so she left the apartment and called me a few minutes later. She told me that she saw the guy speaking to the police downstairs. Apparently, he tried to lie to the officers that I'm his girlfriend and that we got into a fight. My roommate went up to them and explained to the officers that I do not have a boyfriend and that she doesn't know him at all, and the police let him off with a warning. 2 hours later, I heard a buzz from the main door downstairs. Maybe it was the cops. Surely it can't be him again. So I answered the intercom and I was shaken. It was. "Just give me a number and I'll go away." I warned him that I was going to call the police if he didn't leave. A few minutes later, there was a ferocious knocking on my door. He must have gotten in when someone left the building. I was so scared that I immediately called the cops, but he ran from the police when they got there. The worst part about this experience was that my roommate and I were so scared to leave and come back to our apartment, I would have anxiety every time I had to come home, worried he may be standing there waiting for us. For a week, the police escorted us when we felt scared. Unfortunately, I never saw him again. But trust me, being stalked intensely is something disturbing that I wish on no one else.
So, to preface this story, I was about 15 to 16 years old at the time. It was my best friend's birthday, and she had invited about 6 of us over to her place to play a few games, such as Mario Party, Mario Kart, Guitar Hero, etc., and stay the night in celebration of her big 16. So at this get-together, there was 5 girls, including me, and 1 boy. After a while, my best friend asked if we would like to go to the playground, which was about a 10-minute walk away from her house. Of course, being stupid teens, we agreed, not thinking of how it may be dangerous, since the majority of us were young girls, and it was currently 10 p.m. Anyways, we walked down to this park and continued playing grounders when we arrived, which, if you don't know, is a game commonly played in elementary schools. The rules are, one person is it. The person who is it must close their eyes and try to seek the other players as they hide on playground equipment in order to tag them. But there's a catch. If someone gets off the equipment and the person who's it calls grounders while they're on the ground, they are then tagged. Yeah, I know it's a pretty childish game, but it's fun. After a few rounds, we got bored and decided to huddle around in a circle in the center of the playground equipment. We were just talking, joking around, when suddenly I heard what I thought to be something like rocks hitting the chain link fence that resided on the back of the playground. I hushed the group, looked over at my best friend, asking if she heard that too, as everyone looked at me like I had 10 heads. She asked me what I meant, and when I told her it sounded like someone was throwing rocks at the fence behind us, she responded with the classic, "Ooh, it's a murderer coming to get us." Naturally, I glared at her, flipping her off. She knows I get paranoid sometimes, but I have a very good intuition, and something just felt off. A few minutes later, after some more rocks were thrown at the fence, and I obsessively stared down the area behind the fence in paranoia, which was all woods besides the houses on the left and right of the playground, I noticed a light weaving its way through the branches of the trees. At first, I thought maybe it was just a headlight of a car that was coming down the street that connected the street of the park, since you can vaguely see headlights of oncoming traffic through them. But I soon realized there was only one light, and it was bouncing up and down like it was being held by someone who was walking. I quickly pointed it out to the group around me as we all snapped our heads over in the direction. Coming up along the side of the nearby house on the left side of the park was a man who wore a hat, some white, baggy and dirty sweatpants, and a black coat. He was holding a flashlight, not the one on your phone, but an actual flashlight. He was too far away to guess his age, even when he sat on the swings closer to the playground equipment we were on. But we all collectively agreed it was strange, since he seemed to be in at least his mid-20s, I guess from his clothes. And he just came out of the woods by himself to sit and stare at a load of kids. After a brief discussion, we agreed that maybe he was waiting for a ride, or was just resting for a moment. So we tried to brush off the fact he was sitting and was so intensely staring at us However, we started to take note that after a few minutes of us resuming our very competitive game of grounders, that this stranger was slowly inching his way closer to the group. He went from sitting on the one swing furthest away, to the next swing, a bit closer to the equipment we were on, to the next, until he was about 10 feet away from our game. The whole time he just sat there, watching. At this point, all of us had noticed the strange man attempting to get closer to us, and in an attempt to remove ourselves from a potentially dangerous situation, we made a group decision to leave. Getting up, we all piled off the playground equipment, and in pairs of 2, we walked down the stairs on the further side, away from the creepy man. As we attempted to casually walk away, I kept my eyes glued to his figure, and as we neared the end of the street, he got up. Slowly at first, the man started to trail behind us, keeping his distance. I decided to keep my mouth shut at the time because we were about to make a turn. I thought that if he continues to follow us instead of going the other way, I'd bring it up to the others. And wouldn't you know it, the creep stays hot on our heels, not only following which turn we took, but also starting sprinting towards us, screaming,
I'll kill you. I'll kill you.
At this point, the whole group bursts out into a sprint. The adrenaline I felt made me run so fast I was ahead of everyone else. Everyone was urging each other to run. I didn't even take a second to see if the others were behind me. That was, until I heard my best friend struggling to run. She has pretty bad asthma. I instantly felt horrible for running off on her, so I ran back to her side, grabbing her hand and quite literally dragging her along, repeating things like, "Deep breaths, you got this. Come on, we have to go now." This whole time the man was still running, screaming behind us, and was catching up quickly. At this point, both me and another girl in the group took it upon ourselves to get my best friend moving as fast as possible, both taking a hand and running at a pace she could keep. Luckily, this park was only about a 10-minute walk from my friend's house, and as we all piled in through her garage door, I turned to see this delusional man start running up her driveway. He got about halfway until our big fluffy savior ran to the open door. My friend's 100-pound, fully grown German Shepherd. She lurched at the man, barking as we gripped her collar in an attempt to keep her from running completely after the man. Luckily, her sudden and loud appearance caused the man to freeze in fear before running away down the dark, lamplit street. We were terrified for the rest of the night and only managed to sleep after putting random items next to us. We even had a rake. But the most comforting, our big, fluffy hero, just in case the creep decided to come back. So, to the crazy creep who enjoys watching kids at the park, then chasing them home, let's not meet again.
This happened back in early 2015. I was then a 19-year-old guy, living in a rather bad area of Portland, Oregon. Even though there were occasionally some belligerent homeless people and drug addicts, violent muggings were very rare, and most of the city felt very safe, even at night. One of my best friends turned 21, and we decided to go bar hopping and then clubbing. I was in a group of about a dozen other people, and 3 of which were my roommates. Unfortunately for me, I was the only one in my group who was either under the legal drinking age or did not have a fake ID. This meant I was unable to enter the bar. However, to my luck, there was a nice Mediterranean restaurant across the street from the bar which I ended up going to. I stayed there for more than an hour, and then I was ready to leave. I've done that walk many times, even at night, so I was never scared. Until this night, of course. From my apartment, my roommates took an Uber to the bar. This meant I would have to walk back since I didn't have Uber and my phone battery was running low. The distance back to my apartment was about 3 miles. The time was already close to midnight, and I would be reaching my apartment at around 1 a.m. I decided to walk the distance anyway, since I hadn't been to the gym and thought it would be good exercise. I began my walk and passed by a lot of drunks. Even though some of the drunks would shout things at me, I never felt unsafe or threatened by them, so I was okay. However, the last mile to my apartment was through a darkly lit park that can be scary at night, not because of any crimes cut, but because there's only one street light in that stretch of road. I reached this somewhat creepy area at around 12:30. As I descend down the dark and narrow street, I notice a black Chevy Silverado speed past me and slow down once he does. The truck almost comes to a stop, but then decides to drive ahead. I begin to shrug it off. However, this is where things start to get creepy. After I nearly walk a quarter of a mile forwards, the vehicle comes down the opposite direction and does the same thing. When the truck slows down and almost comes to a halt, I begin to panic but not openly show it. I pretend to ignore the vehicle, but my instincts tell me something isn't right. The truck then starts to proceed, but this time I can't keep calm. I was not in the middle of a dark and isolated park with no streetlights, and there likely wouldn't be a single person in sight. After I walk about 500 feet more, I begin to look in horror as the same pickup truck comes flying towards me and puts a sudden brake about 100 feet behind me. One man, around twice my age and bald, opens the passenger door and comes out of his truck carrying what looks like a hockey club. I look behind and lock eyes with him, and he gives me the most haunting and sinister look I've ever seen from a real person. He yells out, "Get the hell out my sight or I'm gonna mess you up, mud slime." I'm of Indian origin and have brown skin, and mud slime was a racial slur directed towards Muslims. As I was planning my escape, I remember how there was a wooded area behind the park in my apartment. I was considering cutting across through the park and going through some woods, then right across the woods was my apartment. This was smart because I've taken that shortcut during the day, and the truck will not be able to fit through the woods. Just as I was making my way towards the woods, I hear another colorful comment be directed towards me by another large guy walking on the opposite direction of the sidewalk I was in. I see another large man walking his German Shepherd in my direction. After that, the truck driver then began running at us with his hockey club, and I made a run for it. I dart towards the woods. Fortunately, the truck driver decides not to chase us and gets back to his truck. I reach my apartment 5 minutes later. At the parking lot of my apartment, I see the guy walking his dog. He looks to be a roughed-up bodybuilder, so I was a little afraid of him as well. However, we had pleasant conversation. I begin to head to my apartment and look out of my apartment window. To my disgust and horror, I see the black Chevy Silverado drive by my apartment and leave. My friends arrived home at about 3 a.m., just after I went to bed. Thankfully, I never saw the racist creep again, and I moved out of there a few months later. After this incident, I avoid walking alone in dark spots and isolated areas at night. And to the stalker driving a black pickup truck, let's not meet again.
This incident happened when I was about 11, nearly 12. Now, for a bit of background information, at that age, I had already started developing early on, so I would get unwanted attention from adult males. At the time, I never understood why and only wore shirts under my clothes instead of a usual training bra. So things weren't that visible, though you could still kind of see. The area I lived in at the time wasn't the best, but due to my mother being a single parent and only having one source of income, this is where I called home. It was a seemingly presentable looking apartment complex on the outside, though the residents who lived there knew it was anything but. We lived there in total of 3 years, though due to the rising incidents that happened to us, we were forced to move. When we first moved in, crime in this area was not a problem, so we wouldn't sweat it. And to mention, There were a lot of children in the complex, so I thought, hey, nothing bad could happen here. It's a family place. It's completely safe. Having this state of mind, I would usually go outside to sit on our front porch during the summers to play with my dog when I got bored in the house. Where I live, it gets extremely hot during this time, so I had on a tank top and shorts. I remember it was around 5:30 p.m. and it seemed to be completely still outside. It seemed as though no one was out, so it was just me and my puppy. He was about 2 at the time. Now to me, he was extremely protective and very alert. Sadly, I was not. As I was wrestling with him, I hear a rustle in the bushes about 10 feet away from me to the right, but I pay it no mind and continue to play with him, though now my puppy seems very tense. About 5 minutes later, I hear it again, and so does he, but this time, he loses his playful spirit and goes into full on guard mode, ears perked, chest poked out, and eyes scanning. Now please understand something. I was always a very timid child. If I heard anything, I damn sure was not about to go investigate it. My mother was upstairs asleep since she worked night shifts, and due to this, I didn't want to bother her, though she didn't know I was outside anyway. I see no matter how much I try to get him to keep playing, he just won't budge. I turn to where he's looking and I see a man, very rough looking, but I knew I'd seen him before, and he must have lived in the complex. He had on a dirty wife beater that looked beer-stained, dark blue jeans and work boots. He was standing behind the bush next to the building staring at me. I saw his hand moving rapidly, and at the time I had no idea what he was doing. I now know what he was doing behind that bush. All the while he was doing this, he was muttering something under his breath and tried to take a step forward, closer to me, but instead of me running, I was frozen. My dog at this point let out the most vicious growl and snarled at this man, which snapped me out of my frozen state immediately, and I screamed for my mother, running up the stairs as quickly as I could. When I got up the stairs, she had heard me and quickly rushed to me, though I didn't want to worry her, knowing she had to work that night. So I just brushed it off with some excuse and sent her back off to bed. I thought this was over. Wrong again. Fast forward to about 3 days later, and my feeble mind had forgotten about the incident, but I didn't go back outside alone. It was nighttime now, and me and my mum had come back from one of our mummy-daughter days at the movies. It was around 12:30, and we had just gotten home. Me being hyped up on cotton candy and sodas was off my guard again, though my mother was not. I always joke with her about how, even now, she has the hearing of a dog, though I didn't know it would come in handy tonight. One thing about my mother is she wasn't very threatening standing at only 5'5", though she had lots of muscle in her from working on the ambulance as an EMT. Another thing is, regardless of where she was, she always had a switchblade that she could pop out faster than lightning if she needed to. As we shut the car off, we both noticed that the streetlight illuminating our building was off. We both looked at each other in a WTF realization. It was pitch black now, though every other light was on in front of the other buildings but ours. Me being scared, this knocked out all hyper feelings I had. I was not attentive. As I was getting out of the car, I noticed that I heard a rustle behind the bushes, like I had heard 3 days ago. I stopped dead in my tracks outside the car and looked at my mother without speaking, asking her, "Did you hear that?" Though only through eyes. She never misses a beat. Her eyes were already trained on the bushes to my right. Deciding to play it cool like we didn't hear them, we continued to get our bags out of the car. As we shut them, it seemed time stood still. The pathway for us to get to our building was a Y-shaped, and the realization hit that this person was literally 5 feet away from me, dressed in all black with a hoodie on and hands in his pockets. I could feel the ill intent meant for us. As we got to the front of our car, I looked at her and she looked at me, knowing this meant on the count of 3, run. By now my heart was beating out of my chest, and on 3 I booked it to the front door, and threw it open, running quickly up our steps, running with key in hand. Though as I ran with my mother behind me, I could hear a third pair of feet were running too. I had cleared 5 feet between me and the door and about 20 steps in 10 seconds with my mother in tow. Since our door to the building was incredibly hard to open, once slammed, she shut it tightly behind her, waking up my sleeping dog upstairs in the process, and he started barking like crazy. I could hear the door handle jiggling, trying to be forced open as me and my mother finally stepped into our apartment. We heard the building door slam open and footsteps running up, though by this time the door was locked and barricaded. My dog growled and jumped at the door, and in hearing this, I think it scared whoever was there away because all that was heard was retreating footsteps out of the building and around the side of the building into a very thick brush. We called the police, but they said there was nothing they could do about it. I even told my mum finally of the man I saw, and she knew who it was. Let's just say, I had to stop her from doing something she'd regret and getting locked up, since the police told us to mind our business and get used to it since, and I quote using his words, women should be in the house anyway.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Hope you enjoyed tonight's video. I'd like to give a huge thank you to Papa Scare for making this video possible. I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't think I'd have made a video today if he hadn't have agreed to work with me beforehand, because our daughter Aurora was just born yesterday. Yay! On the 18th, I should say. So there you go. It's been a busy few days. 2 days. We're at the hospital, we're all good, baby's all good. So yeah, dad of 3. It's going to get interesting. I'm going to wrap this up here because I am really tired and I'm hoping to maybe get some sleep. Maybe my wife will too. I'll see you on Sunday probably for a nice chunky compilation, but until then, stay awesome and I'll see you in the next one.